The DNA is telling us. So doing the Y chromosome work, I found that there wasn't a link between Richard III and the male line relatives who are alive today.
In 2012, archaeologists made a discovery that stunned the world: the long-lost remains of King Richard III, buried beneath an unassuming parking lot in England. But while the excavation solved a 500-year mystery, it also opened the door to an even bigger one. Because when scientists extracted DNA from the ancient bones, what they uncovered didn't just rewrite a chapter of royal history, it threatened to upend the very foundation of a centuries-old bloodline. This wasn't a small discrepancy. It was a genetic revelation so unexpected, so controversial, that historians, genealogists, and even members of the modern royal family were forced to confront a possibility no one had ever dared imagine. Today, we're diving deep into the breakthrough that shook the monarchy, the secret hidden in a king's skeleton, and the shocking truth his DNA may finally reveal. A royal grave desecrated. For more than 500 years, the final resting place of Richard III was a complete mystery. The history books told of his end at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, the last major clash of the brutal Wars of the Roses. Accounts said his body was taken to Leicester and buried without ceremony at the Grey Friars Friary. But as centuries passed, the friary was torn down, and the memory of its exact location faded into pure legend. To put it mildly, the king's grave was thought to be lost forever, with some rumors even suggesting his bones were dug up and tossed into a river. That all changed in 2012, when a team of archaeologists began a dig in a most unlikely place, a city council car park in Leicester. Historical maps suggested the old friary once stood right there, its foundations hidden beneath layers of asphalt. Few people expected to find anything, let alone the remains of a long-lost English king. But then the impossible happened. Within days of digging, they uncovered a human skeleton. What many overlooked at first was its location in the area believed to be the friary's choir, precisely where historical records said Richard III was laid to rest. The skeleton, at first called simply Skeleton 1, had features that immediately grabbed everyone's attention. It belonged to a man in his early 30s. Richard III was 32 when he passed away on the battlefield. The bones were covered in the scars of combat. There were at least 10 distinct injuries, including 8 on the skull, consistent with vicious blows from swords or halberds. The most shocking fact is that some of these cuts suggested his helmet had been ripped off in his final moments, which matched the gruesome contemporary accounts of his violent end. But the most telling clue of all was the spine. The skeleton had a severe case of scoliosis, a dramatic S-shaped curve that would have caused one shoulder to sit much higher than the other. Chroniclers from Richard's time described him as having uneven shoulders, a feature that William Shakespeare later exaggerated into the grotesque image of a villainous hunchback. The bones revealed the truth. While he wasn't the monster from the plays, he did have a significant physical condition that would have been impossible to hide. You can see this everywhere in historical propaganda, but here was the physical proof. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains squarely in the late 15th century. Even more amazing, chemical tests on the teeth revealed a diet fit for a king, full of expensive meat and seafood. Everything seemed to fit, but it wasn't enough. For history to officially accept that this was Richard III, they needed undeniable proof. They needed something stronger than bones and historical accounts. They needed DNA. The thing nobody tells you is that finding a genetic link after 500 years is almost impossible. The challenge was set. Connect this ancient skeleton to living relatives and finally solve one of history's greatest missing person cases. The bones told a fascinating story, but only DNA could reveal the shocking truth. A royal scandal laid bare. With the bones of a possible king suddenly in their hands, everyone's attention rushed straight to the science lab. The archaeological clues looked convincing, but the world wanted something stronger. Absolute proof. The big question hovered. Could DNA taken from bones buried for more than 5 centuries really confirm that this was Richard III? The challenge was, to put it mildly, enormous. Ancient DNA is unbelievably delicate and can be ruined in an instant by modern contamination. Yet if the attempt succeeded, the result would be historic. Scientists focused on 2 special forms of DNA that travel through generations with barely any changes: mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, and the Y chromosome. They began with mitochondrial DNA. This type is passed only from a mother to her children, meaning you, your siblings, and your mother all carry the same mitochondrial DNA. Genealogists performed something close to a historical miracle, tracking Richard III's family line through his sister Anne of York. They followed an unbroken female lineage across 19 generations and 500 years, eventually discovering 2 living descendants: Michael Ibsen, a furniture maker in London, and Wendy Duldig, a researcher in Canada. These 2 were Richard III's great-nieces, 16 times removed. When the lab results arrived, they were a perfect match. The mitochondrial DNA from the skeleton and the DNA from Michael and Wendy were identical. The chances of that being random were astronomically small. This was the breakthrough the world had been waiting for. In February 2013, the University of Leicester declared that the remains belonged, beyond any reasonable doubt, to King Richard III. Case closed, right? Not even a little. Because the mitochondrial DNA told only half the tale. The other half was about to reveal a scandal nobody expected. Next, scientists turned to the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed strictly from father to son. In theory, Richard III's Y chromosome should be the same as that of other men still alive today, who descended from the male Plantagenet line. Researchers traced this male line back to Edward III and identified living male relatives from the Somerset family. They collected their DNA, ran the tests, and prepared to confirm the final piece of the puzzle. But what they found was shocking. There was no match at all. The Y chromosome from Richard III's skeleton did not align with the Y chromosome of his supposed living male relatives. Instead of confirming his identity, the test uncovered a huge secret hidden inside the royal family lineage. It meant that somewhere within the 19 generations between Richard III and these men, there had been what scientists gently call a false paternity event. In simple terms, someone's official father was not their biological father. A royal affair, a hidden child, a broken bloodline. The implications were explosive. And what many missed is that this wasn't just about some distant ancestor. This revelation could shake the validity of the entire royal bloodline. This unexpected twist didn't only challenge Richard's history, it threatened the entire royal narrative. A dynasty built on a lie. The revelation that Richard III's Y chromosome didn't match his supposed descendants sent a shockwave of fascination through historians everywhere. His identity had been firmly confirmed through his mother's line, but his father's line had suddenly revealed a deep fracture running straight through the royal family tree. The question was no longer if a scandal happened, but when and where. The Y chromosome analysis used descendants of Edward III, a king who ruled more than a century before Richard, which meant the break in the genetic chain could have occurred at any time across the long stretch of generations between them. There were countless possible points where it might have happened, and each possibility carried huge and dramatically different consequences for history. If the false paternity event happened early, maybe involving one of Edward III's own sons, then the entire claim of the later Plantagenet kings, including Richard, rested on a lie. They would not have been the true biological heirs they insisted they were. But what if the break appeared much later, perhaps in the family lines of the modern descendants who were tested? If that were the case, then Richard's bloodline might be completely legitimate, and theirs, not his, would be the ones under suspicion. What people often forget is just how crucial bloodline was to a medieval monarch. Their entire authority, their divine right to rule, depended on a flawless chain of father-to-son succession. The most shocking truth is that one single moment of infidelity could, in theory, undermine the entire legitimacy of a dynasty. This discovery adds a heavy layer of irony to the Wars of the Roses. That brutal 30-year conflict, which tore apart families and cost thousands of lives, was fought over which faction had the more legitimate claim to the throne. The House of York, Richard's side, and the House of Lancaster both traced their ancestry back to Edward III. They shed endless blood arguing over who was the rightful heir. And now, half a millennium later, modern science suggests that the idea of a pure, unbroken Plantagenet bloodline may have been nothing more than a centuries-old illusion. They may have been fighting over a crown that, genetically speaking, neither of them had a flawlessly valid claim to. Historians dove into old documents, dust-covered records, and long-whispered rumors, hoping to uncover hints. Suspicion centered on prominent figures like John of Gaunt, one of Edward III's most influential sons, whose descendants later led the House of Lancaster. Could the break have begun with him? Or perhaps even with Richard's own father, Richard, Duke of York? Rumors had circulated even in the 1400s that Richard's mother, Cecily Neville, had an affair while her husband was away at war. If Richard's father wasn't who history said he was, then Richard III never had a true claim to the throne to begin with. The DNA offered undeniable evidence that a secret existed, but the details, the who, the when, and the where, remained just out of reach, a shadowy scandal lingering through the centuries. And as it turns out, the DNA was only the beginning. The bones had even more to reveal about the king, a king's true face. While the world was buzzing about the royal scandal hidden in the king's genes, the skeleton itself kept whispering secrets that separated the myth from the man. The DNA revelation was shocking, sure, but it was only one piece of a much bigger story, one that forced historians to confront just how wrong centuries of legend had been. For those wondering if this was all some elaborate hoax or overblown media stunt, the truth lay right there in the bones. The physical evidence didn't just confirm his identity. It completely rewrote the story of who Richard III really was. Let's start with that infamous hunchback. Thanks to Shakespeare, the world saw Richard as a twisted, evil villain, his outer form mirroring his supposed inner corruption. But when scientists examined the spine, what they found was both fascinating and tragic. Yes, he had severe adolescent-onset scoliosis. His spine curved dramatically to the right, making one shoulder higher than the other and shortening his height by a few inches. But he wasn't the grotesque figure we were led to believe. His condition wouldn't have crippled him or stopped him from leading men into battle. In fact, his bones showed strong muscle attachments, signs of an active, physically capable fighter. What had once been used as proof of wickedness turned out to be nothing more than a medical condition. His enemies hadn't just killed him, they had twisted his body into a metaphor for evil. Then there was the chemical diary hidden in his bones and teeth. Through isotopic analysis, scientists traced where he lived, what he ate, and even how much he drank. The findings were astonishing. As a child, Richard had moved around England, reflecting his family's shifting fortunes during the Wars of the Roses. But once he reached the throne, his diet transformed. He lived like only a king could. His meals were filled with luxury meats: swan, crane, venison, and the isotopes revealed he was consuming a staggering amount of alcohol. Based on the carbon and nitrogen ratios, researchers estimated he was drinking about a bottle of wine every single day in his final years. That detail alone didn't just tell us about royal excess. It proved this was a man at the top of society, living the kind of opulent life only a crowned ruler could afford. But perhaps the most haunting discovery came from his face. Using a 3D scan of the skull, forensic artists rebuilt it piece by piece, layering on digital muscles, skin, and expression until a face emerged from history. What appeared wasn't the sneering monster immortalized on stage, but a composed, intelligent man with a faintly weary expression. The resemblance to early portraits of Richard III was uncanny, almost eerie, and when the DNA data was added, the image became even clearer. He likely had blue eyes and, as a child, light blonde hair that darkened with age. For the first time in 500 years, people could look into the eyes of a king long vilified as a murderer and see not a caricature, but a real human being. Then came the harshest and most devastating revelation of all: the truth of how he died. His bones preserved every moment of his last stand at Bosworth Field in 1485, where he confronted the advancing forces of Henry Tudor. His skeleton showed 11 wounds, 9 of them striking his head. 2 were instantly deadly. One vicious blow sliced off part of his skull. Another drove a weapon deep into its base, almost certainly ending his life in a single moment. His helmet had been ripped away, leaving him completely exposed. The remaining injuries revealed that he had been surrounded, forced to fight on foot, and overwhelmed in a frantic and violent clash. And after death, the humiliation only continued. His body was stripped, likely slung over a horse, and finally buried in haste beneath the ground that would one day become a parking lot in Leicester. Yet those bones, damaged, fractured, and hidden for centuries, told a story far more powerful than any long-standing myth. They revealed a man who fought with every breath until the very end. Not the fearful tyrant of popular legend, but a warrior king crushed by fate. The victors may have shaped the written history, but the bones delivered the real truth. This remarkable discovery urges us to wonder if the royal bloodline itself rests on a hidden secret. Does it change who truly deserves the right to rule? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.